Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we will look to answer one simple question. Why did New York have so many victory arches? And furthermore, why were these entirely ornate arches, reminiscent of those found in Roman times, being constructed as temporary structures and then demolished just a few short years later? Today, we will look at three massive temporary arches which graced the streets of New York over 100 years ago. Beginning with the temporary arch from 1891 that was made permanent and still stands today. If any of you have been to New York or seen movies set in New York or have ever seen any galleries of photographs of New York, you may be familiar with the Washington Square Arch, also known officially as Washington Arch in Washington Square Park, Lower Manhattan. The history here is questionable at best. The arch, which was designed to commemorate George Washington's inauguration as president, which occurred in New York City in 1789, was actually first built in 1889. We're told the original first arch was apparently plaster and wood, reminiscent of the apparent temporary buildings being founded at the World's Fairs. We have very little other relevant information to go on about this structure. We're told the arch was built where the current arch sits. However, credit for the original arch is given entirely to one man, William Rhineland Stewart, a man without a Wikipedia page, but according to the interweb, was a prominent New Yorker born in 1852 who was once the president of the New York State Board of Charities. Red brick asylums and orphan trains, anyone? We're told Stewart, along with his Freemason friends, contributed towards construction of the original arch, and these same Masons from St. John's Lodge No. 1, the oldest Masonic lodge in New York, led the procession through the arch in 1889, using the so-called George Washington Inaugural Bible and the arch as their centerpieces for their parade. We're told the temporary arch, which I was able to find a few photographs of, was adorned on the top with a very unique statue of George Washington. We're also told that this temporary arch from 1889 was so popular and raised so much money for St. John's Lodge No. 1 that the Masons decided to make the structure permanent. Remarkably, it appears the stone arch was actually built over an even earlier burial mound, as during excavations for the permanent arch, it is said that 10 feet below ground level was discovered a burial plot and tombstone from roughly 1803, believed to be indigenous. It also seems to indicate how high the landscape or the ground level had risen in less than 90 years, from 1803 until this arch was made permanent in 1891. The Freemasons of St. John's Lodge No. 1 also laid the cornerstone for the permanent arch and were present at its official dedication in 1895. In 1918, two statues of Washington were added to the north side of the arch. It was cleaned and thoroughly restored in 2003 through 2004, and in modern times, the Washington Square Arch has become an unofficial symbol of New York University. Again, we have the concept that the original arch was made in less than 2 months and was temporary. It was built by one man and a team that he had hired. The second arch, as lavish as it may be, looks eerily similar to the first, just without the Washington statue on top. The second arch took over 4 years to build and was constructed by major masons in New York City, including designer Stanford White, with sculptures by Herman McNeil, Alexander Sterling Calder, and carvings by the Piccirilli brothers. We're told the first arch was built for roughly $3,000 in 1889, while the second arch had multiple donors built in 1891, with one of the donors, not even the largest donor, being Ignacy Jan Paderewski, a famous pianist who would also go on to be the third Prime Minister of Poland. He donated over 4,500 American dollars just for the second permanent arch alone. The inscription on the attic of the Washington Arch reads, and I quote, "Let us raise a standard to which the wise and the honest can repair. The event is in the hand of God," end quote. And this is said to be a quote from Washington himself. But what exactly is the event in which he is referencing? And why is everything in American history so cryptic? Inherited. The second, even more flabbergasting Triumphal Arch of New York is the temporary Dewey Arch, which stood in Madison Square, Manhattan from 1899 through the year 1900. This absolutely massive arch, created to celebrate the historical victory of Admiral George Dewey at the Battle of Manila Bay, was also said to have been built out of the same temporary materials used at the World's Fairs. And again, we have a rather intricate design here for something that was built to be almost immediately torn down. This massive arch was even taller than the still standing Washington Arch, as the Dewey Arch stood 85 feet tall. Again, we're told this Triumphal Arch of New York was built in almost no time at all, as by July of 1899, the plan was hatched to construct this arch for the parade to celebrate Dewey, scheduled for September of that same year. We're told in less than 60 days, a committee headed by architect Charles R. Lamb and his partners within the National Sculpture Society formulated the concept, drew the blueprints, and constructed what would have been one of the largest archways in New York City history. Furthermore, the arch, seemingly a gift from the heavens, was modeled after the Arch of Titus in Rome, and the Arch of Dewey was said to be equally as impressive. It was topped by the works of over 28 different sculptors from all across the world, and topped by a massive sculpture of 4 horses drawing a ship. The entire arch, again temporary, was completely electrified and was fully illuminated at night. Again, read between the lines, but we are told by September 1899, directly after the parade, the arch began to fall apart. The sculptors of America, unlike the Freemasons, were apparently unable to gather the funds to make the Dewey Arch permanent, and we're told the Dewey Arch, celebrating a victory in the Philippines War, was dismantled in part due to the growing unpopularity of said Philippines War. The arch was demolished in early 1900, and the large sculptures were sent to Charleston, South Carolina, where the history of them goes entirely dormant. No one knows who received the sculptures or what happened to them, but they have never been rediscovered or documented since. The final temporary arch of New York I'd like to discuss is one that is often conflated with the others in this video. However, this is the last temporary victory or triumphal arch to have ever been founded in New York City. This is known simply as the Victory Arch, and again, we have a rather questionable current narrative history we've been presented with. We're told the Victory Arch was a World War I triumphal arch. However, it was built beginning in 1918, with the war not actually being ended until the Treaty of Versailles in June of 1919. The Victory Arch stood at relatively the same location as the previous Dewey Arch we just discussed, and the designs for the two appear to be very similar. The Victory Arch was also a massive feat of engineering, yet said to be constructed to be entirely temporary. The architect behind this arch was Thomas Hastings, and it was based off the design of the Arch of Constantine in Rome. An elaborate sculptural composition adorned the top of this arch, which included a chariot with symbolic figures representing wisdom, power, justice, and peace. We're told this remarkable structure actually took throughout most of 1918 and into early 1919 before it was finished. So unlike the other arches in today's video, the Victory Arch did not pop up in a matter of days. Interestingly, we're told the Victory Arch was the most utilized and most seen of all the arches in today's video, being visited by millions of people in victory and welcome home parades held in New York City beginning in March of 1919. However, we're also told it was actually a movement headed by a man who would later go on to become mayor of New York, LaGuardia, in 1920, that ultimately led to the demise of the Victory Arch. Through his rallying, the arch was deemed to be too gaudy and unnecessary to make permanent, and it was torn down before the end of the year 1920. We do have a few remaining, highly detailed photographs of this massive temporary structure, the last temporary triumphal arch to ever grace the streets of Manhattan. So what is your opinion on the temporary arches of New York City? Are these truly similar works, or are they all unrelated? And when compared to the buildings of the earliest World's Fairs, could these majestic arches also have been founded under similar, somewhat questionable circumstances? I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas down below, and I can't wait to talk to you all on the next video.